Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Crowd Valley webinar entitled Building Real Estate Platforms with the Crowd Valley API. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Paul Higgins. I'm one of the co-founders of Crowd Valley and also the CTO of the company. This is the third webinar that we have done in the last couple of months in this current monthly series. And if any of you are interested in having a look at the first couple of webinars that we've done over the last few months, the recordings and the presentations are all available on our website. So we had one 2 months ago about the key factors and things that you should consider when first starting to plan or starting to think about creating your own digital finance platform, and then a second just a month ago about the basic structure of the Crowd Valley API. So this is the third webinar, and this is going to be focused on real estate platforms in particular. So this is what we'll cover today. I'll spend just a couple of minutes explaining who we expect will be attending this webinar, so that everyone knows they're in the right place. And the bulk of the time will be in running through a typical sitemap for a real estate platform, real estate crowdfunding or peer-to-peer lending type platform. We will show some examples of front-end sites that you can have a look at, so that you can get a sense of a typical layout, a typical kind of functionality. And then we will kind of go through some explanations and guidelines of how you would use our API for building these functions. And then we'll just point out a bit more information at the end around how to find our API documentation or other resources that might be useful. We've had quite a few questions sent in advance, so thank you to everyone who sent in a question before. We'll try and get through as many as we can at the end. And if you have a question during the presentation, then please feel free to put it into the GoToMeeting system. There should be a way for you to write out a question in the kind of chat box or something similar, depending on which device you're using. And then I'll try and answer as many of those as possible at the end. But if for some reason we don't get to your question, then please get in touch with me afterwards, or with some of my colleagues at Crowd Valley, and we'll be happy to help with any questions either on the business side or, of course, the technical side as well. So the purpose of this webinar is to run through the typical kind of pages and layouts and functions that go into making a real estate funding platform. We expect that if you're here with us, then you're probably either a developer who has been asked to start building or to improve the functionality of an existing real estate platform, or perhaps you're a real estate professional who is looking to move some of your operations online. So perhaps a real estate broker or a development firm, or a group with your own portfolio properties that you help to raise capital for. Or perhaps you're a kind of technical project manager who's looking after the development projects and interested in seeing how the Crowd Valley API could be beneficial to you as you build this site. So that's who we have in mind when putting this webinar together today. Just briefly about Crowd Valley itself. So we have been in this online kind of finance sector since 2009. Personally, having worked with my colleagues here in the management team and the rest of the team as part of another firm originally, and then we created Crowd Valley as a spin out in 2012, and now we have over 100 customers around the world, lots of them doing real estate crowdfunding or real estate debt financing of various types. So we have gone through several iterations of the API and the core products, and that's what we'll go through today. I just wanted to kind of start by covering some points about the basic architecture of our systems, of our platforms. This is at a high level how our platforms are put together, and I just wanted to show this to highlight where we're focusing today. So in the Crowd Valley architecture, you have a series of front ends for each customer that is operating on top of our infrastructure. And so you can see at the top left, you've got customer A, customer B, customer C, and so on. Each of them has one or more unique and, of course, completely independent and separate front-end platforms. And all of our front-end platforms are driven by the Crowd Valley public APIs. The APIs themselves are REST-based APIs, very much kind of web standard. And through those APIs, you get access to Crowd Valley, what we call Crowd Valley core services, which are some of the functions that we'll cover today, and also various integrated third-party services for functions such as handling payments or know your customer checks or ID verification checks or credit scoring data, for example. So in today's webinar, we're thinking just about one web end user front end, so the part highlighted there. But just to point out that there is also the admin user backend, which is where you as the platform operator would spend your time in managing the users and the data on the platform. And that's something we won't cover today, but if you have any questions about that, then please get in touch about that. So a typical real estate platform sitemap would have these sections to it, and this isn't an exhaustive list by any means. This is really just a kind of base level or a minimum, perhaps. So we certainly see real estate platforms that don't have secondary markets, for example, or that have deal origination areas to them, as well as just investor areas, and perhaps more functionality around the fundraiser role or the kind of agent or affiliate role. And so again, if you're interested in learning more about those elements, then you can get in touch with us and we can follow up separately on those. But at a base level, then you're likely to have most of these sections on your platform. So a homepage where your users would start when they first come to log in, a property listings page or a kind of listing of the current offerings that are available through your platform. And then for each property that's available, you'd have a property overview page, so a page to go into the detail about the offering and to show perhaps documentation or details about the investment or about the property. You may have a secondary market listing page, and there are a couple of different ways that we see of setting that up. And then typically you'd have a profile page for the user, so my profile page, for example, and then some kind of portfolio page, which we've called here My Investments, but it could be the user's portfolio or the user's history of transactions that they have completed through your platform. So we're just going to go through each of these in turn. We'll show you a few examples of front ends of how others have done it. And then for each of these 6 sections, we'll just have one slide to explain how the examples that I've shown have been implemented using our API, and we'll kind of go through it in that way. So, as an example of a home page, this is actually from a front-end template that one of our development partners has put together for us. So I could also mention that if you are looking to start a new platform from scratch, then we do have front-end templates like these available for free. If you want to start with a kind of basic Bootstrap front-end template, then you can take those and just build on top of them. So this is a very typical kind of example of a front-end real estate homepage. So you can see use of big images, and you can see a particular example of an offering of a property that's available, and some details of the current status of the funding round. Another one very kind of similar in the use of larger images, and then in this case they have gone for the kind of starting point of looking at how much you're looking to commit through this kind of platform, and whether your preference is for debt or equity. So that's another kind of example which has a clearer call to action on the front, on the home page. And then another kind of quite common feature that you see on a home page is this idea of like a featured investment opportunities section, or a featured properties, or most common, most popular properties, for example. So this is again something that we see quite a lot, and it's maybe relevant for your platform to have something like this. And the concept of what you mean by featured might be chosen by you in a kind of editorial sense. So you might want to highlight a couple of your favorite opportunities that are in the platform, and it could be a kind of manual process of selecting which properties you want to highlight on the front page, or it might be more automated than that. So you might want to have your featured opportunities as the ones that are currently most popular, or the ones that have raised the most capital so far, or the ones that have that are closest to closing, for example. So you can play around with all those sorts of options. And then, of course, you often see sort of typical kind of marketing information and other sorts of information about the platform and about the processes. This kind of thing often goes onto a homepage as well. So in terms of actually kind of putting the homepage together, often the homepage content is relatively fixed. So you have a few choices of how you might want to implement a kind of back-end connection on the homepage. So one choice is that there is a content API that's available through our backend, and this works as a kind of API-driven content management system. So if you have a library of media, for example, photos or videos or kind of marketing copy, then you can load those into our CMS, and then you can have the system pull down data directly from that system. So if you want to have for example, a kind of slider with images that represent some of the most interesting properties that you're raising capital for on the homepage, then you can use the content API, and the content API doesn't require users to be logged in as well. So if you want your users to be able to see immediately some data from some imagery or some information on the homepage, then you have that option. In the second example we saw, there was actually no kind of data coming from the back end, so there was no information about investments or about the offerings that were available, the properties that were being listed. So in this case, it was a simple kind of front end script which took some data that the user would input and then send them to the next page where they would be required to log in. So you can have something like that on the homepage, or you can also kind of require users to log in immediately as well if you prefer to do that. It often also depends on your regulatory environment as well. So if you are in an area where where there are certain constraints over what information you're allowed to show to unregistered users, or kind of the general public, then you may want to put some just sort of higher level information on the homepage, and then keep the detail, keep the real information about the offerings on the logged in areas, the kind of private areas of the site. If you do want to show live data from the back end, then we start getting into implementing the platform API. So this is these are our kind of standard core services, and the relevant endpoint for showing featured opportunities, for example, is the get offerings method. You'll see in our API documentation, if you have a look later on, that there is an attribute called network, which is the starting point for all of our API calls. And the network is simply the kind of customer ID in our system. So when you sign up and register for sandbox access, for example, if you want to start playing around with our API, then as part of setting up your account, we will give you a network name, and then that name is used when you make the API calls. And it's also something that we use to create the authentication with our API, because you'll be using a network, a specified network name, and then you'll also need to use an API key that's connected to that network. So if you see the network attribute in any of these in any of the API documentation, then that's what that means. So the next kind of common section is what you could think of as the property listings page. So this is often where your investors would spend the most time, and it's often the most dynamic and the kind of the key area of the site that you want your users to come back to regularly. So this is simply the page that lists the current published and live offerings that are available for investors to make an investment commitment towards. So in this example, you've got a series of kind of cards laid out vertically, so you can see one line per property. In this example, you've got a kind of badge in the top left, so it says active in both cases. So you may want to have a page that also lists properties that have been closed, that have been completed, and in that case the tag could say something else. Or you may also want to show properties that are not yet ready for funding, but they may be in a kind of preview stage, and so you can also kind of provide that kind of information to your investors. And then you've got various sort of filtering options on the right hand side here. So in this case, so you have the option to filter by region, and you can also filter by the funding goal as well, or the target that each property is trying to raise. And then within the boxes, as you can see, you've got some fairly typical crowdfunding, peer-to-peer lending type user interface elements. So you've got the progress bar, funding progress bar, and then you've got various other pieces of information about the offering. And then this is another example which uses exactly the same back-end API call, but is laid out slightly differently. So this is laid out in more of a kind of matrix. So instead of having a vertical list, you've got a kind of, I think it's a 3x3 matrix, for example. And here you've got slightly different kind of badges or tags. So rather than having open and preview, for example, you've got opportunity closed representing the ones that have been funded, and then opportunity completed. I should say these are all kind of sample mock-ups, so they're not. This isn't live data we're seeing here. And then you can see different information again, sort of large photos, and then information about the funding goal and term and expected returns. And then again, slightly different filtering options, sorting options as well. So you can filter by stage, or the kind of the life cycle stage of the property. And you can also sort the data by, in this case, they've got most recent or most popular, or those that are ending soonest. And again, most popular is something that you would define, could be, for example, the opportunities, the offerings that have received the most funding, or it could be those that have attracted the most investors so far, the highest number of investors, or the most page views, or sort of things like that. So in both cases, you're using, again, in fact, the same endpoint in the API as we saw in the home page if you're setting up a kind of featured offerings page. So you use the get offerings endpoint, and this gives you a list of all of the offerings that have been published from the admin portal. And you have various options for sorting and filtering and using pagination as well. So one important point to consider here is that the design of the API has been made so that the retrieval of these offerings, these live offerings, does not include offerings that are in draft status, for example, or offerings that have been rejected by the admin team. So this kind of comes to some of the back-end functionality that we're not really going to cover in a lot of detail today, but I'll just cover it to the extent that if you have a front-end platform that includes a kind of fundraiser role, a fundraiser user who is submitting a property for you to review, then when they submit that property to you, it goes into a kind of draft status or a submitted status, and then as the admin, as the operator of the platform, through our admin portal, you would see that submitted property, and then you'd be able to mark it as approved and ready to go, and then you can also mark it as published as well. And only when it's been marked as published will it appear in the offerings that are returned by this get offerings endpoint. So that means that you don't need to worry about filtering offerings that have been archived by you, or have been rejected, or are just in draft status. When you're thinking about implementing the front end, you just need to show all of the lists that you get back from the offerings endpoint, and the kind of detail about the admin workflow is kind of handled separately. And then thinking about how you display the data, the offering data model includes all of these different attributes, along with several others that I haven't listed here. So the most typical attributes that you might want to show are things like the name of the offering, how much has been raised so far as an amount, how much has been raised as a percentage, the funding goal, so how much is the target they're looking for, external commitments, which is something you can use through the admin portal again if you have a property that has already been funded off the platform, so offline. You may want to start a campaign where you have an existing commitment from a third party of some percentage towards the funding goal, and you can represent that by adding an external commitment. And then you've also got equity-based attributes like valuation and equity offered, and you've got debt-based attributes like interest rate and term. You can use number of shares, and then there are other attributes that also define the rules of the investment or the offering, so open date and close date, for example, and there are others such as defining the minimum amount per investor or the maximum overfunding amount, for example. So if you want to build those kind of conditions or criteria into your platform, then those are available. And implementing those just means that if an investor tries to make an investment for this offering before the open date or after the close date, then it won't be processed. Then we also have two attributes which can be used to store custom information and other kind of data and media. So the info attribute is actually an array of kind of key value pairs. So if you have data that's specific to your platform or your vocabulary, the way that you describe your offerings, then you can use the info attribute here, and you can save as many different additional attributes as you might need there. And then you've got the file attribute, which is a way of saving images or documents to the offering. So if you can use this to save any number of images against the property, or it may be further information about the offering, like its term sheet or repayment plan, for example. If those are documents of PDF format or Excel format, for example, then those can be uploaded again using our API, and then they are stored and available, kind of attached to the offering. I'll move on to the property overview page. Typically you would start from the property listing, and then you'd click on the property listing itself, and then you get to a page that could be a bit like this. This is really where you would store and you would show all of the information that you might need to kind of share with the investor in order to help them make a decision about whether they want to commit to this particular investment. So this is quite a typical structure. You could have a couple of tabs like we have here: overview, key documents, developer information, links, updates. You've got some standard information about the offering itself. So again, very similar to what we saw in the listings page, things like funding target and funding progress so far. And then you might have sections for photos or a map as well. It's quite common for real estate. Another example, again, using large images. So these images would be saved into the file attribute of the offering. And then on the right-hand side, you can see some other attributes based on this particular property. Some of these will be kind of core attributes or sort of native attributes to our API. So, for example, we've got the funding progress, so that's directly available through the API offering object. Projected returns is something that you could implement using the interest rate attribute of offering. Target would be the funding amount. Investment term is also a kind of standard attribute of the offering object. And then you've got some others that are kind of custom information that are particular to this case, to this platform. So dividend yield, gross rental yield, annualized return, these would each be saved into the info attribute as custom information. You can see how the data that you show on the front end can use some of the standard API objects that we provide, and also it's flexible in that way that you can create your own and add as many of your own kind of custom attributes to the site. And then one more example, again very similar. In this one, you've got a couple of call to action buttons here as well. So you've got one called invest, and then one called add to watch list. And then again, you can see a kind of funding progress, and you can see images, and then other custom information further down. So in this particular setup, this is again one of our front-end templates that is available for free if you want to start from an existing Bootstrap build. And this one has a section called Agent View, and then a property type commercial down the bottom. So you can use those as much as you want. And then one more here, again, a sort of similar setup. This one also shows a section of which investors have made a commitment so far. And so, as well as showing the offering information, you can also use the API to retrieve information about investors who have already committed to this offering. So in the kind of center and bottom of the screen here, you've got data that would come from the API, from the offerings endpoint. And then in the investors box, you would retrieve that separately as a separate API call to retrieve the list of investors for this current offering for this property. So to retrieve information about a single specific property or a specific offering in the way we've defined it in the API, you're using the get offerings and then offering ID. So you're providing the identifier of an offering to the API, and then requesting data back on this specific offering. So you would get the offering ID by calling the get offerings endpoint first. So as well as giving you data about each of the offerings, it would also give the ID of each offering. And then when the user clicks on an offering from the listings page, then when you take the user to the property overview page, then you would also save the offering ID, and then you'd use that to retrieve data from the back end. So it's a very kind of standard REST type architecture, and this kind of structure is how we've designed the whole system. And again, you've got the same kind of data model here. Again, this is just the same list as we had before. Secondary market section. So as I mentioned at the beginning, not everyone has a secondary market, but it is quite common for real estate platforms to have a secondary market. You can think about it in different ways. So you could have a layout that's very similar to the primary market, to the kind of main list of offerings that you make available. So this one, for example, is pretty much identical to the previous one that we had that followed this layout. Alternatively, you can have more of a kind of a table layout in this case, so slightly more kind of financial data and less less information or less kind of imagery that are about the property itself. This screen, in fact, is taken from another front-end template that we make available. So you can think about different ways of presenting this information, whether you want to have it more kind of financial and more about the financial information, or you want it to be more about the property itself. And that will depend on your particular operations and your business model. But actually implementing a secondary market page is very straightforward. It's again using the offerings endpoint, but you're just filtering offerings where the attribute that we have called is secondary offering is true. So it's just using one of the standard filters that you can use for retrieving offerings, and you would use it by specifying an attribute called field name with the relevant operator and the value following that format there. So all of the information about using filtering and sorting and pagination options are all listed on our API documentation page. So you can have a look at that later. But if you have any questions about how to implement a particular filtering method, then you can get in touch with us afterwards. And then finally, you've got this kind of my profile, or my account, or my investments, my portfolio, this kind of area. So this is for the user to see their own account information. Perhaps they would have some instructions on how to complete their KYC requirements, for example, or their their background check requirements, if that's something you need to go through, depending on which territory you're in and what kind of offerings you're making available. And it's also an area for the user to just interact with their account. So, for example, changing their password or updating their address details. And then it can also be an area where you can see your own kind of transaction history, your wallet, for example, or your history of investments and all the documentation that goes with that. So a couple of examples. So we had the first one, which was just showing your basic profile information. You may have something like this. This is a kind of appropriateness quiz, for example. So this is something that we see quite a bit in some territories, that when you first register as an investor, as a new user to a site, then before you're allowed to go through the investment process, you would have to submit certain information about yourself, about your background as an investor, how much experience you have in investing, how much, to what extent you understand the offering, the return of the offering. So this kind of functionality is quite typical in a profile page. And then you may have something that also includes your investments, for example. So this could be another way to lay out your profile page, which, as well as showing some basic information about you, which you might want to adjust, and you could also see a list of properties that you've invested in this case. So implementing a profile page uses the self endpoint. So at a very kind of basic level, to retrieve information about the current user who's logged in, so yourself as a user, then you use the get self endpoint, and this get self request retrieves information about the user who's logged in, such as their email, their name, their profile image, and then any other information that has been provided by the user. So you may have things like biography or a location, nationality, all sorts of things like that. You can also provide some of this information on behalf of users if you're using the admin portal. So if you as the operator of the platform are in touch with the investor, or perhaps know the investor from your existing offline interactions, then you can also provide some of this information, although you can't change the user's password for them, and there's a few other things that you're not allowed to do as an admin user. And then there is the same structure for adding custom information to the user. So you have the same info attribute, which is that array of different key value pairs. So if you want to add further information, for example, what kind of investor they are, if they're a accredited investor or a restricted investor or an unregistered investor, you can use that attribute to save any amount of custom information that you might want. So different categories or different kind of additional information that you might want to save. Also things like investment preferences. So if you want to take the user through a process where they are providing their preference for different types of deals or different types of properties they're interested in, so whether they're interested in commercial versus residential real estate, or whether they're interested in different sizes of deals or different sectors or different regions. All of those kinds of information, that kind of information, you can save to the info attribute, and then you can also use that to match up investors with properties as well. So in the front end implementation, you might have a script that for example, checks whenever a new property is published, and then alerts the user based on their investment preferences and sends them a notification. So you can set up those kinds of processes. And then there's also attributes like referral codes and affiliate codes. So if you're working with brokers, for example, and you want to track which users are introduced to your platform by a particular broker, then you can assign the broker an affiliate code and then ask the broker to provide the affiliate code to the users that they register, and then those users will be associated to the broker's account, so that you can then track which users are making investments based on which broker introduced them or which other user introduced them, and you can also kind of manage invitations and that kind of affiliate activity through the system. Again, the managing affiliates and brokers is quite a large part of the core kind of services API. So if you have more questions about that, then please get in touch about that, and we can go into a bit more detail. And then we've got the kind of portfolio page, so the My Investments page, as we called it here. This can be also any kind of representation of data that comes back from the API based on the investments that a user has made. So you might want to let the user know the summary of all of their activities on this page. So you can see on the left-hand side things like how much in total they've invested, how many properties they've invested in, the value of the investments they've made so far, the estimated return. All of these can be kind of configured based on data coming back from the API, which is tracking the user's activity. And then in this particular case, we've also got this kind of summary graph, which is a kind of bootstrap user interface element with some JavaScript to render the graph based on data coming back from the API. Similarly, you might want to have some kind of breakdown of which properties make up the majority of your portfolio, which locations you're investing in, and you might want to also list the properties that the user has invested in. So for implementing this kind of page, this sort of dashboard page, you're again using the self endpoint, but you're using the self and then investments and self payouts endpoints. So self investments retrieves a list of all of the investments that you have made as the user, so the logged in user has made. I won't go into too much detail about the overall structure of the API here, because the previous webinar went into a lot more detail about that. But just briefly, the investment is the object that represents the user's commitment to make an investment, to make a payment, or to contribute to the offering. And every investment is associated to one offering. So if you're trying to find out which properties an investor has made investments in, then you'd use the self investments endpoint to retrieve a list of all of their investments, and then for each investment you can then retrieve information about the offering, which is the property. Then the self payouts endpoint is used to give information about the payment schedule, so the expected transactions based on a particular investment. So here we're thinking about transactions such as a repayment schedule if you're doing a peer-to-peer loan, or a dividend schedule if you're doing a kind of equity crowdfunding type setup. And often with real estate platforms, you have some kind of combination of repayments. So you might have, for example, if you're an investor in a property project, you might have some capital gain return, and you might also have some regular repayments based on rent, for example, that comes back from the property. So you can represent all of those schedules, all of those kind of expected returns, and plot those on the kinds of charts we saw on the left-hand side there. you'd use the investment endpoint for information about the original investment, so the investment amount, how much you committed, and then whether your commitment was actually accepted, approved in this case, and whether it was settled in the sense of being finalized and having money transacted. And then the payout is for keeping track of the kind of future payment schedule, or also past payment schedule as well. So a payout is always connected to an investment, and the payout would include attributes like the due date and the payout amount, and then the type. So if you, for example, made an investment of $100,000, for example, and you're expecting a certain percentage per month, which is based on, say, rental income on the property, then you can use the payout object to represent the payment going into the future, each payment going into the future every month. And you can show the investor what their kind of expected cash flow or expected value of their investment should be. So that's kind of what we just went through: the homepage, property listings, property overview, secondary market, and then my profile and my investments. There are, of course, lots of other kinds of layouts, kinds of pages and functionality that you might want to include in your platform that we haven't covered today, especially around the deal origination side. So if you have brokers or fundraisers or project owners that are submitting deals, submitting properties for you to review, that's a whole other area of your platform that we haven't covered today. But there are kind of core APIs that manage all of those activities as well. So if you're not sure about how to use those, then please get in touch. And if there's anything we've kind of gone through today that's sparked some other ideas or questions, then again you can let us know afterwards, and chances are that we have some support for the kinds of functions that you have in mind. Just to point out how to find the API documentation. So this is the page where you can find our API documentation. You would get here by going to our website, crowdvalley.com, and then there is an API docs link in the top, and you just click on that link, and then you can get to this page. This is for developers. This is actually a kind of interactive Swagger documentation system. So you can actually go onto this page and you can test out each of the API functions, and you can use our demo credentials to retrieve data from the API, from our demo network, and post data, and you can kind of run through all of the different things that you might want to do. And then if you want to sign up for your own account, your own Sandbox account, then there is a sign up form on our website. Again, you can just leave your information there, and then one of our team will get back to you and set up an account for you. And Sandbox use is completely free, so you can build your real estate platform in sandbox mode, in test mode, for as long as you want, and you don't pay us anything for that. You can just use the APIs as much as you need to, and then to use the API in live mode, then you need a subscription to the live service. So other resources that you might find useful, just as you're starting to think about your platform, there are many things on our website as well as just the API documentation, so you can go to the link directly there. There's also a lot of information about regulatory research and information about the legal aspects of running a crowdfunding or peer-to-peer lending platform, covering many different countries around the world. And this is research going back several years now, 5 or 6 years. The website is also, as I said, where you sign up for your free developer sandbox access. And also, if you are a real estate professional and you don't have your own developers, you don't have your own tech team, We also have a community of certified partners. So these are IT, tech development agencies, UI, UX agencies, and API implementation guys who have worked with us and worked with our APIs and have gone through the process and delivered customer front-end platforms. So if you're looking for somebody with quite a bit of experience in building these sites, then you can also get in touch with us and we'll find an appropriate partner for you to work with. And there are many different options, different partners that you can work with depending on where you're based and how much help you need. Also, the webinar recordings of this webinar and also previous webinars and all of the slides, the presentations that you've seen are available on our website. We'll be doing another webinar in about a month's time on the 9th of December, which is going to be focused on the new US-based regulation called Title III. So this is an equity crowdfunding regulation that has been now finalized by the SEC in the US and will be coming into force next year. So if anyone is interested in specifically building a Title III equity crowdfunding platform, then you can join us for that. And it's going to be similar to this one in the sense that it's going to be mainly focused on developers and kind of giving ideas on how to implement the API. And then finally, the front-end templates that we make available have many example sites and ready-made front-end platforms for real estate and also other kinds of digital finance platforms like crowdfunding and securities, private placements platforms. So if you're interested in taking one of those and starting from there, then again, please get in touch and we can help you out with that. I'm just going to go through a couple of questions and we'll finish in the next 7-8 minutes. If I don't get to your question, then please just follow up with us afterwards and we'll get back to you. We had one question about implementing maps. So how do you show, is there a way of kind of showing the property on a Google map, for example? So we actually have an integration in our API with the Google geocoding service. So what that service does is it takes the postal code or the zip code of a property and calls the Google service to do a lookup, and then it retrieves the latitude and longitude of your property, and then you can use that to display the property location on a map. So all you need to do to activate that is you need to have a sandbox account with us. Of course, you need to have a way of using our API. And then you just need to let us know that you want to use that service, and then we turn it on in our backend. And to do that, we just give you a kind of Google geocoding key that is then attached to your account. So if you want to use that service and automatically generate longitude and latitude coordinates for your properties, then you can do that, and you just need to let us know. There's another question about filtering. Which other attributes can we filter by? So with filtering, you can actually filter by any of the kind of core object attributes. So for an offering, for example, you can filter by, for example, the funding amount is greater or less than a certain level, or you can filter by for example, the location being of a certain region or certain city. But if you have custom information saved in that info attribute, then you can also filter by those as well. So you can filter by your own custom kind of categories as well as the endpoints, as well as the standard objects. So if you're looking for specific examples of kind of code examples of how to put that into practice, then please let us know, and we can give you some code examples for that. There's another question here about which third-party services that we have for KYC, so know your customer compliance and anti-money laundering compliance. We have a list on our website. So if you go to crownvalley.com, actually on the homepage, you can scroll down and you can see a list of all of the third-party services that we're connected to. It will really depend on which country or which territory you're operating in as to which of those services will be most relevant to you. If you're based in the kind of the more established markets for this kind of activity, so the US or the UK or mainland Europe, for example, or say parts of Southeast Asia, Hong Kong and Singapore, those kind of places, then you should have quite a few options for working with various different providers of KYC services. If you're slightly more out of the way, then you might have fewer options. But if you're looking at trying to bring in some automated KYC services, then again you can get in touch with us and let us know.